Hey guys, welcome back to this show. Let's continue to talk about your psychology issues you have, what you're going through. Let's at least make sense of it. Have I said this before? So when something does go wrong or you make a decision you don't want to make, you start doing things you don't want to do, when you find yourself lost on YouTube, texting a girl 35 times in a day, we at least know why. It makes sense. It makes total sense once you understand how your psychology works, how your emotions work, and that's what we can help you with here. And then, of course, the more it makes sense, the more aware of it you are willing to become. And as you become more aware of it, you begin to change. That's when real change, that's where real discipline comes from. It's not from just making yourself do things. That can work, and that feels good for a certain amount of time. You know, go psych yourself up. Watch all those Jocko Willink videos. That can help. And, you know, I'm not saying not to do that, but not at the expense of really managing the issues you need to manage. If your way of managing stress is to go on a run, let me submit to you that is not a long-term solution to stress. That is a short-term fix, no different psychologically than drinking, better physically, but psychologically it's very similar. It's just a way to relieve stress, not getting to the root of it. Why would you feel stressed? Why would you feel so stressed that you need to go on a run? I mean, physical activity is good, but as a way to compensate for stress. You know, there's a healthier way to manage stress. There's a way that stress works. And when we understand your emotions, we can figure it out. All right. I'm going to kind of reverse the order here in this episode today. I'm going to answer your questions first and then get to something that I want to talk about. I think it'll flow better. All the questions kind of flow into, what I want to talk about. So there are two from the same listener. The first one. So what do we mean by reality exactly? When I say that anxiety makes you lose touch with reality, what do we mean by reality exactly? Is it objective reality we lose touch with, or is it some kind of subjective, intersubjective, social reality? Or is this a figure of speech that I use, just we lose touch with reality? What is going on? Because he has the anxiety here. Let's say you're at a party, you're at some social situation, and you feel anxious, you think that other people are looking at you or laughing at you, and they're not laughing at you. They could be. I mean, sometimes people are laughing at you. But in this situation, they're just, it's all in your head. They're not really laughing at you. So in objective reality, they're not laughing at you. Nobody cares. Probably nobody's even paying attention to you. But subjectively, they are. So psychologically, that matters. And I think that's why we have a distinction between psychology and philosophy. Now, for a long time, up until about 150 years ago, psychology was philosophy. Every psychologist was a philosopher. And I would submit, go get my notes on the history of philosophy, I would submit that the reason we have something like idealism, like Plato's World of Forms, is he was a psychologist when he thought he was a philosopher, because we didn't have these two fields distinguished in our mind. And specifically, philosophy is, to the extent that, it's man's relationship with reality, objective reality, and psychology is man's relationship with himself. It's the study of that, how we relate with ourselves. So there's obviously going to be a bunch of overlap here, and it makes sense why these two fields were confused and kind of joined together, which is where I think ultimately idealism comes from and all the epistemology behind that. There's no real world of forms. Obviously, go read The Republic. It's silly. It's a silly philosophical theory, but we still latch onto it and it's still important to us because it does say something psychologically true. There's this world of forms, and we can kind of intuit something. And then when we get the epistemology of idealism, some kind of mysticism, these are all things that we intuit. That what we're describing here are psychological processes, but we're trying to put it in a philosophical framework. I think that, it leads to some confusion in philosophy, and why we have these theories that, would not hold up, would not make a lot of sense objectively, but they do make a lot of sense psychologically. We're describing psychological processes. That's why we hold on to these theories. And this is Jung's main point. He's like, let's take what Kant said and make it psychological. That's a big step. Because what happens when it's psychological? Now we're no longer disconnected from reality. Now we can get back the values of the Enlightenment. There's a reality out there. There's a mind in here. My mind exists to grasp reality. We can have that while at the same time understanding where Kant is coming from and saying, well, maybe we are, I think I use the example in my book, we're built, we could say, that to eat a bunch of carbohydrates, so we're going to get fat. That may be our proclivity or our propensity, but that doesn't mean we have to eat candy every time we see it. We can learn about these processes. We can learn about, okay, well, it makes sense that I would want to eat 85 mangoes, but that may not be the best for me long term. So I can understand these processes, like I can understand how my emotions, if I am not paying attention to them, I can understand how they can distort reality, distort my perception of reality. It feels like reality, but that's not what's going on. And yeah, so anxiety is a psychic truth, which is really important. It is not objectively real. And what you get with the mindset training, CBT, Stoicism crowd is that they realize this and go, oh, well, anxiety is just in your head. Just forget about it. By saying that anxiety is a psychic truth, not an objective truth, this actually, when we understand how our psychology works, this elevates its importance. This makes it more important to us. Because now we need to manage that anxiety. It's not going to go away. We need to manage that anxiety if we want to be in tune with objective reality. Like the example of somebody who is at a party and thinks that people are talking about him, but they're not. It's like, and the anxiety is probably not even about the people at the party talking about him or in his mind, right? It's not that fear. It could be about a bunch of other things that are constellating, as let's say, to use the Jungian term, on this party issue. Yeah, and this is, Jung's main point in a bunch of essays, but I think most notably in Answer to Job in Volume 11, Psychology and Religion. He gets to the end, I think it's paragraph, 7 something. And he, in a sense, says that every statement in Job and the Bible is, or the Quran, or the Talmud, whatever, it's true. It's all true. It's all psychologically true. If you ever read the Bible, it's all true. There's no question that it's truth. What do I say in my book? What is it true of? It's not whether something is true. It's what it is. What is it true of? What is your anxiety true of if you happen to be at this party and you think everybody's talking to you? That's not objectively true, but it's true of something. It says something about you, and what that says about you is going to be your lens into greater awareness, so you can actually go on and change the anxiety and not just go on some mindset training blog. Some guy tells you to just ignore it. It's going to work in the short term. You can psych yourself up. It'll work in the short term. Should I get back to it? You can... you can artificially inflate the stock of GameStop, and it'll work in the short term, but that doesn't mean it's a long-term money-making solution. So that's how we distinguish the differences. We take this field of philosophy and tease out this one part, psychology, and say, well, it's how could we rightfully talk about man relating with reality without first discussing how man relates with himself? Because we see how that relationship, how our relationship with ourself, how our relationship with anxiety, we've all been in that situation. We think somebody's talking about us. They're not. It's just our anxiety. Okay, now we're interfering with our relationship with reality. So when I talk about reality, I mean both realities. What do I say at the end of this show? I wish you all the joy and pain that comes from being in touch with reality. Well, I mean both. The psychic reality of your anxiety. What is your anxiety? Let's look at it. Right? What's the word? Let's confront it. And it's when we confront the anxiety, then we can look at reality for what it is. They're just reflections of each other. This is how we can bridge both worlds. Bridge the world of Enlightenment philosophy with modern philosophy. Take what Bacon said, combine it with what Kant said. Kant's wrong in the way that he meant it. He was a very good psychologist, not a philosopher. Very similar to Plato. He's wrong. Philosophically, he's wrong. Psychologically, A lot of great insights there. That's why it's still important to read, even though it's just none of it's true. So let's dovetail this into this listener's next question about the concept of original sin and what Jung means by it. This listener says that Jung talks about original sin a lot. I don't know if he does. I mean, he does talk about it at times, but what he means by original sin is exactly what we're talking about, the difference between you're anxious at a party, though that's not objectively true, it is psychically true, and in order to get at the objective truth of what's going on in that party, you have to acknowledge the subjective truth of the anxiety. What Jung says, and I'm looking at paragraph 106 in volume 5, Symbols of Transformation. I have the notes from that, my annotations, paragraph by paragraph, for the most part. I group some paragraphs together. So if you're interested in those, email me. I think I'm probably going to sell that, like my philosophy notes. I'm probably going to sell them on the site for $3 or something. So you can wait for that, or you can just save $3, email me now, and I'll send them to you. But I think that'll be a good resource, because there's another resource on the Jungian International Association of Psychoanalytic or Analytic Psychology. Yeah, it's IAAP. And they have summaries of all the collected works, but they're just not that good. they're what do? They miss something. They don't really explain where Jung's coming from. They just say what he talks about, but that's not really healthy. They don't give any context, or helpful. Probably not healthy either, but they don't really give any context for Jung's points, and they don't explicate them in any way that's going to be meaningful. I mean, you read through those, you're like, what is going on? They don't really help. So I'm going to offer some kind of solution to that, give people notes. So, because I do think these works are important, and it's exactly what we need right now as a society. It's what we all need as individuals. A way to come to terms with our depth, come to terms with exactly this situation that you find yourself when you're at a party. We need to recognize both truths. And I do think it's ultimately a simple concept, but we almost never talk about it. We talk about it to some degree, indirectly, and I think understanding what Jung was coming from here is going to be really helpful. So I think that'll be a good resource. Anyway, so yeah, I'm looking at paragraph 106 in Symbols of Transformation. The original sin, Jung does not think we have original sin. But he does think that it is psychically true. He will not have a bunch of people doing something or believing in something if there wasn't some psychic truth to it. Now, does this mean that there's something inherently wrong with humans and we're just destined to be a sinner and we needed Christ? Well, maybe we'll talk about it. Yeah, I think it's going to be important to talk about Christ here. And we needed Christ to come and save us from our sin. No, philosophically, I do not think that is true. But psychologically, that is true. And what Jung thinks of original sin is it's just like this placeholder for what he would call the shadow. Now, what happens when Jung takes original sin and says, well, it's actually your shadow. It's these parts of yourself that you're not aware of and come up and affect your behavior, come up and change how you behave, can adulterate your intentions. There's nothing sinful about that. It's just the nature of how your psychology works, and when you're not aware of certain parts of your unconscious, they may affect you in perhaps nefarious ways. So it's understandable, if we do not understand what psychology is and how it works, that we would latch onto something like original sin. And every religion has some concept of this, some religions much less so. But every religion has some concept of this. Just man's no good. There's just something about us, even if it's just to imply that, well, we can't figure out reality, that there's nothing out there for us. Our relationship with the earth, there's just something coming between us and our relationship with the earth in a healthy way. And in order to transcend this, we can never transcend it in this realm. We need to go up to another realm to totally transcend this. We're just not fit to live on earth. This is the implication of original sin, and we all can kind of feel where that's coming from. But Jung's insight here is to, make it the shadow. Because now it's the shadow, we can do something about it. But now it makes sense. Now maybe it's nothing about who we are, it's just how we've adapted. Like what Jung talks about with the types. Everybody, now we have the Myers-Briggs. That's my point about the Myers-Briggs. Not that your type indicator is wrong necessarily, but that's not who you are. That's simply how you've adapted. That is how you've adapted to the environment based on something inherent in your psychology. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. Ultimately, it's immaterial. And this is what he means by original sin. And like Christ, when somebody says, so I'm not a Christian, but when somebody says, I found my Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ, that is a statement of 100% psychological truth. Now, philosophically, that is not true. Christ he's not the Son of God. He did not come down from heaven, sacrifice himself to absolve you of your sin, rise from the dead, dance around a little, and go back up to heaven. That is not what happened. I do think that Christ existed, and he was a very well-programmed robot, but not our Messiah. I'm not Jewish. That's a Futurama reference. Anywho, but that is a statement of profound psychological truth. Now, when people who are religious hear that, they think, oh, well, you are relegating. No, not relegating. You're disabusing. You're making small. You are minimizing the importance of Christ and what he did. No, I'm not. I'm actually elevating it. Just like when I say, well, the anxiety isn't real, it's all in your head. Oh, you're making it like it doesn't matter. No, I'm elevating it. It's even more important now, because now it's yours. And now it's yours to manage. Just like the Christ image. He's not the only one. What is this a symbol of? This is a symbol of the archetype of the self. Self, capital S, self. So when somebody says, Christ saved me from my sins, yeah, that's true. You need to construct a self to save you from your shadow, to manage your shadow. And if you look at the Old Testament, it's God's, of course, there's symbolism there. It's God coming down from on high and telling the Jews what to do, and they do it for a little bit, but then they get off course. And what does Christ do? Christ comes and corrects that. But it's not Christ. Not Christ as the man. It's just a symbol of the self. You think Christ is the only one? He's number 35, right? Number 34 is Akhenaten. It's the same principle. What's number 36 going to be? Jung. That would be a good one. It'd make a lot of sense. We're in a new processional age here with Aquarius. That's what Jung talks about. Just the importance of the unconscious. It's just all symbolism for how to construct a self so we can manage reality in a healthy way. So when we're given things to do, when we're given things that we know we need to do, like not commit idol worship or idolize false idols, worship false idols, now we can actually do that. Of course, that's all symbolism too for, I would say, reality, right? Just replace Lord in the Old Testament with reality or regulation. It makes a lot of sense psychologically. Everything is psychologically true. And the Quran is psychologically true too, it's not just the Bible. Very similar to UFOs. Jung talks about UFOs and how, whether they're physically real, it almost doesn't matter from a psychological perspective. It's all very interesting. It's interesting how these UFOs come to us at a time when everybody's afraid of nuclear war. That's when we start getting UFO sightings. I mean, there are UFO sightings in the past, but there's been a proliferation of them in the past, now, 70, 80 years. Since World War II, since we've gained this power of nuclear weapons that could eviscerate the entire Earth if we allow ourselves to do that. And of course, what do these aliens supposedly come down and tell these people who have these UFO sightings? They say, you humans are more important than you think you are. And you could really hurt yourselves here. And really what you have to do is see each other as brothers. You have to see every human on the planet as your own brother, in a sense. You need this kind of connection with other people. This is exactly what Jesus said. We're just projecting these symbols of the self, symbol of what a well-integrated self would say, and making it about UFOs. But it really is just about our psychology. Even if UFOs are real, well, we do know UFOs are real. I mean, there are unidentified flying objects. Are they aliens? That's another question. Or is it, some like Bob Lazar's story about anti-gravity that Area 51 is covering up. Yeah, maybe. Pardon me, but I do need a little bit more evidence than just some guy on Joe Rogan talking about it. Maybe he could be telling the truth. Who knows? And I think this is just a really great way to not only make religion, in my view, mean more than it already means. And anybody who's religious out there, I would never want you to disregard your religion. If you want to think that Jesus is the Son of God, great. I think that's helpful. All I would say is let's look at him in this other way. Let's look at what he really represents psychologically. Same thing Akhenaten represented. And I think then you can have your Jesus as the Son of God, but also you can see, well, this is something I'm projecting onto it as well. You know, if somebody had a UFO sighting and it meant a lot to them, I think that's great. Great, that means a lot to you. Now, let's not get lost in the details of whether you truly saw a UFO, because ultimately, psychologically, that's not going to matter. What is going to matter is, what does it mean to you? What meaning can you get from that UFO? Ultimately, I would argue you are getting meaning from yourself. Same thing, so I got this question. Oh yeah, so my video a couple weeks ago on homosexuality, whether it's a choice. I got a question about the theory from the guys who wrote 10,000 Year Explosion. Cochrane was one of them. I forget the other guy. But anyways, in that video, I said that, and I tried to respond to the guy on the YouTube comment, but YouTube would not let me comment. I could respond to the guy as long as I don't talk about homosexuality. It's possibly a choice, and maybe the reason why they kept deleting it is because I was putting homosexuality and pathogen in the same sentence with the same thoughts. So maybe, I don't know, maybe have some YouTube censorship. I better go on Twitter and complain about it. That'll do a lot. But I think we run into the same distinction between philosophy and psychology in not just homosexuality, but a lot of what we see now with, you know, like the million genders, or your two soul, or your genderqueer, bi, whatever. It's the same issue going on. Well, first of all, you know, with homosexuality, if you didn't see that video, I think there is, you know, the conversion therapy is wrong. But at the same time, the born this way is wrong too. Both are confusing. Both are very limiting. And Lady Gaga, you know, Poker Face, it's a great song, but you going around saying born this way is adding, I would argue, just as much confusion to people who are working through their sexuality as the conversion therapy is. Because you're essentially coming out and saying it's one way and it's definitely not the other way. When in truth, your sexuality is kind of this fluid thing that can change, and some people, because of maybe certain environmental factors, are more likely to change their sexuality. More open to various sexual experience, right? The Kinsey scale, right? Is that Kinsey experiments? The Kinsey scale? I think that's what it is. There's like there's like 6 layers between heterosexuality and just pure homosexuality. It's not just one or the other. So, I think that's what we're getting at when, so you can't choose your sexuality, right? You're born that way. So what's the compensation for this? What's the cultural compensation for, no, you're born that way and you can't question if you're homosexual. Well, what do we have now? We have gender. And now there's 65 million kinds of gender expression, which is not true. I mean, philosophically, that's not true. Psychologically, that is, I'm sure, very true. To somebody who thinks that they have 3, Native American souls, that is a profound psychological truth about them. And what do the conservatives do? And this is part of the whole cultural split in our society. What do the conservatives do? They come over the top and say, well, no, that doesn't exist. There's only 2 genders. Which, they're correct, philosophically. But given my experience, anybody who's trans or has a bunch of souls, what they're trying to do is they're trying to explain this subtle individual thought they have, relationship they have with their sexuality. And they do not have very healthy attachments in their life. That's what we're living in, the age of attachment disorder. So they need people to validate them. Right? They need to talk about their 72 souls, or 72 virgins, whatever. Their 72 souls. I was thinking of the Quran. They need to talk about them in the way and feel validated, which is true, they do. Not in a political discourse, but in the context of a therapy clinic, yeah. I think that's really important to talk about. And maybe that's really healthy for them. Maybe having 3 Native American souls, that is part of their individuation process. I could totally see that. Doesn't mean it's objectively true. But because we lack this distinction between philosophy and psychology, a distinction that Jung really made clear, then we're just talking on 2 different frequencies here. Like the conservatives think that they're, like really smart. Oh, I can't believe how stupid people are. You can't believe how stupid people are? Go listen to yourself in therapy. You probably don't go to therapy, but go listen to yourself in therapy. You sound stupid. You're not, but why do you sound stupid? Because you're hitting up, you're butting up against latent emotions. And those latent emotions, emotions we're not aware of, they distract, they warp our thought process. So we find ourselves at some party and we think that other people are talking about us. They don't even know who you are. What a stupid thing. Philosophically, psychologically, very important. Anybody who's not a Christian, why would somebody believe that Jesus died for their sins? No, this is a psychological truth. And you need to understand the story of Christ as you need to understand the story of Akhenaten to see what this means about who we are and how you can develop yourself. Yeah, go look at what Christ went through. That is how you develop a self. Psychologically. So anyways, my point about homosexuality is that it's not definitely a choice and definitely not a choice. It's some area in between, but to compensate for that, we have gender now, and there's a million genders because we sense on some unconscious level, whether it's the Christian preacher saying, well, I'm going to convert you, I'm going to free you of your sins, or it's Lady Gaga on the other side saying you're born this way, we're stifled. And so what these million genders mean is we need to talk more about sexuality, and right now the conversation on homosexuality is shut down. We can't do it. So it has to go to this thing that we now call gender. That's become really important. Of course it has, because our sexuality is really important to us. But anyways, I was going to answer the listener or the viewer's question because YouTube wouldn't let me answer it. So what do I think of Cochrane's theory, the writer of 10,000 Year Explosion? And his theory is that homosexuality is caused by a pathogen. And whether I think that this has validity to it, and I doubt it. I doubt it has validity to it because, well, for 2 reasons. One is there's really no evidence for a pathogen, but they're positing a pathogen because the inheritance of, there's no like Mendelian inheritance patterns to homosexuality. So they're thinking, well, maybe it might be an environmental factor. Well, it could be an environmental factor, but why wouldn't we just say it's stress? So you can see why this theory, gets avoided, to say the least, in popular intellectual circles, because in a sense what you're saying is that homosexuality is some kind of disorder, right? Some kind of a disorder caused by the environment, which could be the case. But why would there need to be a pathogen? Oh yeah, it's more than a disorder caused by the environment. I think we're okay saying that, but it's like a disease. Like it's caused by a disease, not directly, but the pathogen would place stress on the mom, and the mom, go back to what I talked about in the Whether Homosexuality is a Choice video, and the mom would have a more difficult time, let's say, injecting her fetus with the proper androgens to turn a male fetus. We're all born female, but androgens go from male to or female to male, and then with enough androgens you go from male to straight or heterosexual, as the theory goes. So yeah, it's based on the idea that, what was I talking about? It's based on the idea that, so there's no evidence that these pathogens exist. It's just a hypothesis. So why couldn't we just say it's caused by stress? Now maybe the stress in the mom is caused by pathogens, but not necessarily. Also, it's based on, that the belief that there's no evolutionary reason for homosexuality, and that might not be true too, because there's some evidence, you can go look this up, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but there's some evidence that suggests that the sisters of homosexual males are more fertile. So they are more likely to produce offspring. So there could be, it's like, well, schizophrenia, very, very similar. Schizophrenia is a huge, what's it called? Blocker. It's a formidable barrier between you and reproduction. But if you have a brother or a sister who's schizophrenic, then you are more likely to have more children. It's the same kind of issue. And, this is every cultural issue. This is going to be my main point here. This is every cultural issue that you may... Let me see how much time I have. I think I'm good. Oh, yeah. So this is every cultural issue that you may disagree with. On either side of the spectrum. On either side of the spectrum. Yeah, I'm kind of losing it here. Like, Black Lives Matter. Right now, in one sense, we can look at Black Lives Matter, and it's my opinion that it is not a real organization. It's a real organization, but it's essentially a Marxist front. It's a racial front for Marxist propaganda. That's really what it is. Now, we can look at Black Lives Matter and say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why would you think this? Look at the statistics. Your claims are not backed up by the statistics. On the other hand, we'll say, well, this means psychologically true. When a black person goes around and says that they are oppressed, that is both true and not true. It is definitely not true in the sense that they are oppressed by the American system. Maybe in some cases, sure, but overall, black people do very well in America, all things considered. However, it can mean something psychologically true to them, and that does matter. And you can say, well, look at the statistics, the police shootings, they're not any worse for blacks, considering the amount of violent crime they commit compared to white people or, people of other races. Well, it doesn't matter. You're not talking to the issue. You're not, well, what they really need is some kind of therapeutic intervention. And I'm not saying you need to give it to them, but just understand what's going on. I'm just trying to, peel some of the layers of the veil back here so we can just see what's going on. And whenever you find yourself disagreeing with somebody, whether it's about something political, whether it's about something religious, whether it's an argument with your wife or girlfriend, everything that they say is psychologically true. Otherwise, they wouldn't say it. Everything is true of something. The only question is, what is it true of? Jesus is the Son of God. That is a profoundly meaning truth. Doesn't mean it's literally true. BLM protests, that is profoundly meaningful and profoundly important, and something I think that our society really needs to pay attention to. Doesn't mean it's objectively true. When somebody says they have a bunch of different Native American Eskimo souls, souls, not true, psychologically very true. When you have a psychological issue, and you find yourself acting in ways that you don't want to act. As ridiculous as having a bunch of Native American souls. When you find yourself doing that, important question to ask yourself is, what is this true of? What is this saying about me? And I think that will increase your connection with yourself and your connection, by extension, a better connection with other people. And I'll leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the questions, listeners. We got a couple more here. We'll get to them next week. But please ask me more. animus@animusempire.com. We do free consultations. animusempire.com/schedule. And I will leave it there. And you know how we are going to end this. I wish you all the joy and pain that comes from the distinction between your philosophy and your psychology.